if you were a young entrepreneur or a fresh MBA, and you had a choice between 3 places to go tell someone to go start their career, they had no family yet, and all their future ahead of them, would you advise them to start a company here, start a company in China, or start a company in India?
Assuming they speak all 3 languages, right?
These people are all multicultural and global.
Multilingual, huh?
What do you think, Jack? What would your advice be? Would you go to China and start a company?
If you have no experience, you will probably have slightly better chance to succeed in China if you have a Chinese background, because the opportunities are really abundant, and a lot of the areas are not explored. And if you're returnees, you have a unique edge. And but not actually opportunities getting harder and harder. If you go back in '99, you can pretty much start anything in China and be relatively successful. Now it's getting difficult because more professional people are also returning, and there's a lot of really experienced people now even in China.
I think that's an interesting point too. I'll put a final line. I mean, when I tried to use my question and my example, I talked about like a fresh MBA, but on the other hand, if someone has some modicum of experience here in Silicon Valley in how to start a company and stuff like that, and you go to China, you're a very valuable commodity in China right now if you have any form of exposure, management experience in startups and things like that, because that's lacking right now.
Right.
And so just to put a finer point on it. Well,
it depends on what the person's capabilities are. I think it's very hard to say whether the person should start it in India or US. Because if the person like me, I mean, frankly, if I did not have the IBM India research experience, I think I would be basically a complete dud when it comes to
And India is different from China. I think, Pramod just mentioned the fact that you like returnees as your model for the entrepreneur. In China, I think, in our own experience, we've had a mix between people that have sort of homegrown entrepreneurs versus returnees as well. So, you make an excellent point on that as well.
I think it's also a function of what the company does. Is it going after the local market? Yeah. I mean, for example, if there's a company that's going to go after the local market, a lot of domain expertise from this market is not necessarily going to translate there, right? Now, I think some best practices will, right? But then you have to supplement the team, and you got to make sure that you got the right set of founders and early managers in the company. On the other hand, if it's a company, let's say, that's building a product for the global market, we've got a company, I'll just name it, it's written up. We've got a company here in town called Sanoa. Sanoa is building, some very interesting XML appliances that go on the core of the enterprise, right? Well, listen, all our early adopters are here, right? I mean, they're level 3 and they're, various insurance companies and so on. So what we did when we started that company was we had 2 founders, right? One's based here, one's based in Bangalore. So all the product marketing, all the product management, and all the initial marketing work, product validation work, is done with early adopters here. All the product development is done back in Bangalore, right? Now, it's a global company in that sense from day one, right? So, if people ask me, well, where do you put that company? Well, you put it in both places at the same time, so you get the advantages of, availability of engineers and cheaper labor, because capital efficiency is very important, and yet your product management skills and your marketing skills have to be centered right here because this is where your customers are.
I think that's a great point. So David, is your advice go east, young man, or?
Yeah, I think I would say yes. I think assuming you can get the same level of mentorship, because I think you're young, energetic, you want to make sure you learn from the best out there. And if your mentor is, let's say, at the same level, U.S., China, and India, I would probably, right now, go to China of the 3. In the mid '80s, when Japan was going through a bubble, right after I got out of college here, it was a crash in '87 in the U.S., and I figured, hey, Japan's going through a bubble. Maybe I should go there and just see what it's like. And it was exhilarating. I mean, for a 22-year-old college grad to be in a bubble economy and just experiencing. But in China, the challenge is there are very few good management team mentors, And so if it's a choice between a good mentor in the U.S. and a so-so management in China, I would stay in the U.S. But I think if the mentorship level is about the same, I would probably go to China.
Okay. So let's change paths just a little bit here and ask from a different perspective. Let's talk about the other end of the cycle, which is the path to liquidity. Let's talk about how you guys view, IPOs, and if it's an IPO and a public listing, where? I mean, you probably have 5 or 6 different exchanges to think about if you're fortunate enough to have a successful company like that, or the M&A market and the mergers and acquisition market. We're all investing, and I'm glad I get to ask the questions instead of answer some of them. But how do you think about long-term liquidity for success, or maybe that's not the right definition for success either? But at the end of the day, you do have investors and you do have employees that are interested in liquidity. And how do you guys think about that?
Yeah, how we think about it is, well, there's the M&A part and the IPO part. So let me talk about the M&A first. I think
you get to pick one, and because of time, we'll go down.
That's fine. I'll just pick the M&A. The fundamental difference between being a VC in the Valley here and thinking about M&A, the set of players that you have to keep abreast of, whether it's a Cisco or a Microsoft, or it's mostly 90% U.S. companies that you got to think of. Now, if you have a company in China or and also in India in the future, when you think about who buys your company, and if you actually look at the statistics, all right, you have companies in about equal amounts from Europe, U.S., Japan, Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, and also Israel. So the fact is, to be effective in the selling part of M&A, when you invest in a Chinese company today, you have to, as a VC, and as an entrepreneur, you have to have those connections with all those regions, because those are your buyers. Those are the people who are going to give you liquidity. And so suddenly you have to be in a completely different paradigm. It's not just going out to lunch with John Chambers at Cisco and maybe 7 or 8 buyers in the U.S. It's all over the world now. And I think that's the dimension that's been very different, because China is so attractive that it's multiple. We just sold a big stake in one of our companies to a Japanese company, and it's something that people in the Valley probably wouldn't really think too much about. They would probably knock on the door of another
Sure.
U.S. company.
Before I put the IPO question to Pramod, which you get to answer by default, I want to remind people we're going to go into a question and answer period as well. So please prepare your Q&A. We're going to have roving microphones that can go around and ask the panelists questions. But you get the IPO question.
On IPOs, so interesting question. U.S.-based companies, you have a couple of options. You can certainly go on NASDAQ and NYSE as well. We've got 2 companies right now, one on NASDAQ and one on NYSE getting ready. You can go on AIM. Tough to get liquidity on AIM, that's my viewpoint. A U.S.-based company really cannot list in India. It's very difficult, right? The IDRs don't exist. The reverse is true. India-based companies can either list on Mumbai Stock Exchange or they can come here, right? In fact, we've got one we're getting ready to file, and we've decided that in that situation, it's a company about 80, 90 million in revenue, so we could list here or we could list back in Mumbai. We've decided, because of Sarbanes-Oxley, that it would be suicide for us to list here when we have the option of listing it back in Mumbai, right? And so that's the procedure we're going through.
I don't know if we have any SEC or policymakers here about American capital markets, but...